The first time Ryan Calloway slammed me into a locker, I froze. Not because I was scared, okay, maybe a little, but mostly because I wasn't used to people getting this close. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind that made the campus look picture perfect. Students milled around, chatting, laughing, completely unaware of the fact that my personal space had just been obliterated by 6 feet of muscle and barely contained aggression. Ryan's hand fisted the collar of my hoodie, his breath warm against my skin. His eyes, sharp and stormy, locked onto mine like he was daring me to look away first. "You piss me off, Monroe," he muttered, his grip tightening. My throat was dry. My heart pounded. I wasn't good at confrontation, I hated being the center of attention. But for some reason, I couldn't let him have the last word. I swallowed hard and forced a smirk, even though my voice came out quieter than I wanted. "Then why do I hear your heartbeat speeding up?" His jaw clenched, something flickering behind his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. For a second, I thought he might actually say something, but then he shoved me away like I burned him. "Stay out of my way." His voice was low, almost unsteady. Then he turned and walked off, shoulders tense beneath his varsity jacket. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside me. Ryan Calloway hated me. But the way his fingers lingered for just a second too long. I wasn't sure I believed him. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax as Ryan disappeared into the crowd. My hoodie was still bunched where he'd grabbed it, the fabric stretched and warm from his touch. I tugged it straight, hoping no one had noticed the way I'd frozen up. People were watching, though. A few curious glances. A couple of whispers. My stomach twisted. I hated attention. With my head down, I adjusted my bag strap and hurried toward my next class. The literature building was quieter, tucked away from the busy campus center. I liked it here. It smelled like old books and ink, and nobody cared if you wanted to sit in the back and blend into the walls. I slid into my usual seat by the window, trying to focus on the professor's voice. But my mind kept looping back to Ryan, the heat in his eyes, the way his fingers had curled into my hoodie like he couldn't decide if he wanted to shove me away or pull me closer. It wasn't the first time we'd clashed. Ryan and I had been at odds since freshman year. Maybe it was because I was everything he wasn't, quiet, bookish, the kind of guy who avoided conflict unless absolutely necessary. Or maybe it was because, for some reason, he seemed to notice me more than he noticed anyone else. I shouldn't have pushed back. I knew that. Guys like Ryan thrived on reaction, on knowing they got under your skin. But something about him made it impossible not to bite back, even when my voice came out softer than I wanted. My fingers curled around my pen. It didn't matter. Ryan Calloway and I existed in two different worlds. Whatever this thing was between us, it wasn't real. I just had to keep reminding myself of that. By the time class ended, I'd convinced myself that Ryan Calloway was a passing storm cloud, loud, disruptive, but easy enough to ignore once he was gone. I was wrong. He was waiting outside the literature building. I nearly stopped in my tracks. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but he was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, eyes flicking over passing students like he wasn't searching for someone, but I knew better. My stomach tightened. I ducked my head, gripping the strap of my bag as I walked past. 2 steps. 3. I thought I was in the clear until Monroe. I stiffened. He never called me by my first name. It was always Monroe, like I was just another opponent on the field, another challenge to overcome. I turned slowly. "What?" Ryan pushed off the wall, closing the space between us in 2 lazy steps. He had a way of carrying himself, controlled, confident, like he always knew exactly where he stood. I wished I had even half that ease. His eyes flickered over me, unreadable. What the hell was that earlier? I swallowed. What was what? His jaw tightened. "You," he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You always have something to say, don't you?" I shifted on my feet. The hallway was thinning out, fewer people to hide behind. "You're the one who started it." Ryan let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" I frowned. "Get what?" He didn't answer. Just stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. The silence stretched, and my pulse picked up. Then, before I could react, he leaned in, not enough to touch, but enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the space between us shrinking to something unbearable. "You really piss me off, Monroe," he muttered, his voice quieter this time. "Rough around the edges." I swallowed hard. My breath hitched before I could stop it. Ryan's eyes flicked down, just for a second, like he heard it. And then he was gone, stepping back and walking off like nothing had happened. I stood there, my heart slamming against my ribs, my hands trembling just enough for me to notice. What the hell was his problem? I spent the rest of the day trying to forget about Ryan Calloway. It didn't work. His words, his closeness, the way his eyes had flickered, like he'd caught something he wasn't supposed to, lingered in my mind long after he walked away. By the time I got back to my dorm, my head was a mess. My roommate, Liam, was sprawled on his bed, earbuds in, eyes closed. He probably hadn't moved since his last class. I dropped my bag onto my desk and sighed. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe Ryan was just playing some twisted game of intimidation, and I was falling right into it. I sat down, flipping open my laptop, but my hands hovered over the keyboard. My mind was still stuck in that hallway, still caught on the weight of his stare. I needed to stop. I pulled out my phone instead, scrolling mindlessly, until a notification popped up in the campus group chat. I frowned. The underground match was this unofficial, barely legal boxing event the jocks put together off campus. It was brutal, no headgear, just raw competition. Ryan's name was already in the chat. Of course. Liam cracked one eye open. "You going?" I shook my head. "Why would I?" "Because Calloway's fighting." Liam smirked. "And you love making bad decisions." I scowled. "I don't." "Aha." He rolled over. "See you there, Monroe." I huffed, tossing my phone onto my bed. I wasn't going. I had no reason to. But 2 hours later, I was still thinking about it. I wasn't going. I told myself that as I sat at my desk, staring at the flickering glow of my laptop screen. I had a paper due next week. I had books I could be reading. I wasn't the type to waste my time at some underground fight, watching sweaty guys beat the hell out of each other. And yet, an hour later, I was standing in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of campus, surrounded by the sharp scent of sweat and adrenaline. The crowd pressed in around me, students buzzing with excitement as they placed bets and jostled for a better view of the makeshift ring. A few guys were already fighting, muscles tensed, fists swinging, grunts and cheers filling the air. I didn't care about any of them. I was here for one reason. Ryan Calloway. And the moment I spotted him, my stomach tightened. He stood near the ring, wrapping his hands with tape, his muscles flexing under the dim lighting. His varsity jacket was tossed onto a chair, leaving him in just a black tank top and athletic shorts. I swallowed hard. He looked dangerous like this. Focused. Like nothing in the world could shake him. Except, maybe, me. I was an idiot for being here. But I stayed anyway, pressing myself into the crowd, trying to be invisible. Then, as if he could sense me, Ryan's head lifted. His sharp eyes locked onto mine instantly. My breath caught. His expression didn't change, but something flickered across his face. He looked annoyed. Or maybe something else. A slow smirk curled at the corner of his lips. Too late. Ryan stepped toward me, cutting through the crowd like a predator locking onto prey. My pulse raced. I wanted to move, to disappear, but I stood frozen as he stopped just close enough that our arms almost brushed. "What the hell are you doing here, Monroe?" His voice was low, barely audible over the noise. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Watching the fights." Ryan let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah." He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my ear. "Or are you just watching me?" I swallowed hard, my fingers curling into fists. He didn't need an answer. He already knew. I should have walked away. I should have let Ryan have his smug little victory and disappeared into the crowd. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering too fast as his words settled between us. "Or are you just watching me?" Ryan wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes were unreadable, dark in the dim light. There was something sharp about the way he looked at me, like he was testing a theory, waiting for me to react. I forced myself to scoff, even though my voice felt thinner than I wanted. "You really think that highly of yourself?" Ryan tilted his head, his smirk creeping back. "I think you don't hate me as much as you pretend to." Heat crept up my neck, and I hated that he could get under my skin so easily. I dropped my gaze, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted when I caught the faint sheen of sweat on his collarbone, the way his chest moved with each breath. Before I could respond, someone called Ryan's name. He glanced over his shoulder. The next fight was starting. His fight. His attention flickered back to me, and for a moment, he just looked at me. Like he was debating something. Then he took a slow step back. "Stay and watch, Monroe," he murmured. "Since you're already so interested." And with that, he turned and walked toward the ring, leaving me standing there, flustered, frustrated, and unable to move. Liam suddenly appeared beside me, shoving a drink into my hand. "You're so screwed," he muttered, grinning. I ignored him, my eyes locked on the ring as Ryan climbed inside, rolling his shoulders, his muscles flexing beneath the dim lights. I should have left. But I stayed. Ryan moved like he was made for this. The moment the fight started, it was clear, he wasn't just strong, he was calculated. Every movement was sharp, controlled. He dodged his opponent's swings with ease, landing his own punches with brutal precision. The crowd roared with every hit, but I barely heard them. I was too busy watching him. He was intense. Jaw clenched, muscles taut, eyes locked on his opponent like nothing else existed. But there was something else too, something simmering beneath the surface, like he wasn't just fighting for the win. Like he was fighting for something more. Liam nudged me. "You look weirdly invested in this." "I'm not," I said quickly, gripping my drink too tight. He snorted. "Aha. Sure." Ryan dodged another punch, countering with a brutal hook that sent his opponent stumbling. The guy barely recovered before Ryan was on him again, relentless. It should have been impressive. And it was. But something about it made my stomach twist. Because this wasn't just competition. Ryan was angry. I could see it in the way he moved, too sharp, too aggressive, like he wasn't just fighting his opponent, but something else entirely. Something he couldn't say out loud. And then, suddenly, he was looking at me. Just for a second. Just long enough for my breath to hitch, for my fingers to tighten around my drink. He smirked. Then he landed the final blow, knocking his opponent to the ground. The match was over. The crowd erupted, people shouting, cheering, clapping Ryan on the back as he climbed out of the ring. I should have looked away. Should have turned and left before he could reach me. But I didn't. And when Ryan stopped right in front of me, his breath still heavy, sweat glistening on his skin, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a challenge. I really wished I had. The air between us was thick with something I couldn't name. Ryan stood too close, his skin flushed from exertion, his breath still uneven. The sounds of the crowd faded into the background as his sharp eyes locked onto mine. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me. Studied me. Like he was waiting for me to break first. I refused to. You enjoy the show, Monroe. His voice was rougher than usual, still catching on the last remnants of adrenaline. I forced a shrug, gripping my drink like it could keep me grounded. It was all right. Ryan let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Yeah. You looked very focused for someone who didn't care. My jaw tightened. You're full of yourself. And you, he stepped closer, voice low, are a terrible liar. My pulse stuttered. I should have said something. Should have turned away, laughed it off, anything to break whatever this was. But I didn't move. Because he was right, and he knew it. A whistle cut through the tension, and Liam appeared at my side, clapping a hand on my shoulder. So, that was fun. He glanced between us, grinning. You two done making eye contact, or should I give you a moment? His jaw was tight. His expression unreadable. But his grip on his backpack strap was tense. Ryan Calloway was jealous. Lucas didn't seem to notice. Alex? I hesitated. I hadn't even been considering it before, but now, with Ryan standing there, watching me. I turned back to Lucas and forced a smile. Yeah. That sounds fun. Ryan let out a short breath, barely more than an exhale. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Lucas watched him go, frowning slightly. What's his deal? I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Ryan didn't talk to me for the rest of the week. Not in class, not in the hallways, not even when we passed each other on campus. He didn't shove me into a wall, didn't smirk at me, didn't throw some smug, teasing remark my way. And I noticed. It was stupid. I should have been relieved that he was finally leaving me alone. But instead, I found myself glancing toward him in class, waiting for something, anything. But he didn't even look at me. Until Friday night. Lucas and I arrived at the poetry reading a little late, slipping into seats toward the back of the small venue. Dim lighting, soft jazz playing in the background, the scent of coffee in the air, it was the kind of place that felt comfortable, intimate. Lucas leaned in slightly. I think you'll like this. I smiled, but my mind was elsewhere. Because when I glanced toward the entrance, my stomach dropped. Ryan was here. I didn't know how or why, but there he was, standing near the door, arms crossed, watching. Not watching the stage. Not watching the poets. Watching me. I swallowed hard, tearing my eyes away, trying to focus on the performance. But it was impossible to ignore the weight of his gaze. Minutes passed. An hour. And when the reading ended, when people started moving, talking, gathering their things. Ryan finally made his move. Lucas and I had barely stepped outside before Ryan was there, blocking my path. Lucas blinked in surprise. Hey. Ryan didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked onto mine, dark and unreadable. Can I talk to you? Lucas hesitated, glancing between us. Alex? I exhaled, my pulse thrumming. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But instead, I found myself nodding. Lucas frowned slightly but took the hint. I'll text you later. Yeah. He gave me one last look before walking off. And then it was just me and Ryan. The tension between us was thick. Heavy. Ryan took a slow step forward, his voice low. You really came to this? I crossed my arms. Yeah, Calloway. Some people like poetry. His jaw tightened. Since when do you hang out with him? My heart stuttered. That's what this is about. I huffed a laugh, shaking my head. You've been ignoring me all week, and now you suddenly care who I spend time with. Ryan didn't answer right away. His fingers flexed at his sides, like he was holding something back. Then, after a long pause. I didn't like seeing you with him. My breath caught. It wasn't a confession. Not really. But it was close enough to leave me speechless. Ryan exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. Forget it, he muttered, stepping back. This was a mistake. He turned to leave. But before I could stop myself, before I could think, the words slipped out. Then why are you still standing here? Ryan froze. For a moment, he didn't move. Didn't speak. Then, slowly, he turned back to me, eyes burning with something dangerous. And just like that, I knew this game between us wasn't over. Ryan didn't leave. He stood there, shoulders tense, jaw tight, like he was fighting something inside himself. His eyes, sharp, dark, unreadable, were locked onto mine, and for a second, I thought he was going to say something. But he didn't. Instead, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're impossible, Monroe. My heart was still racing, but I forced a smirk. And yet, you keep showing up. Ryan's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smirk, it was frustration. You don't get it. Then explain it to me. Silence. For the first time, Ryan looked uncertain, like he was debating whether to walk away or say something he couldn't take back. The night air felt colder against my skin. The streetlights buzzed faintly above us. People from the poetry reading passed by, but I barely noticed them. All I could focus on was him. Ryan clenched his jaw. I don't, he stopped, exhaled. I don't do this. Something in my chest tightened. This? I echoed. Ryan's fingers curled into fists, like he was holding himself back. This, whatever this is. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You piss me off, Alex. I swallowed hard, but I held my ground. Then stop looking for me. Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. You think I want to? The weight of his words settled between us. I should have said something. Should have pushed back. But my brain wasn't working fast enough, and all I could do was feel, the heat of his presence, the tension between us, the way his words sent something sharp through my chest. Ryan took another step forward. Too close. Dangerously close. Tell me to leave, he murmured. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Ryan's gaze flickered over my face, searching. Then, slowly, his fingers brushed against my wrist, just barely, just enough to make my skin burn. I sucked in a breath. Ryan. His touch vanished in an instant, like he'd caught himself. His entire body went rigid, his expression shutting down. Forget it, he muttered. This was a mistake. And then, before I could stop him, he turned and walked away. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. Ryan avoided me again after that night. But this time, it felt different. Before, when he ignored me, it was calculated, like he was trying to prove a point, like he wanted me to notice. But now it felt like he was running. And I hated that I cared. Lucas noticed too. You and Ryan, he said casually one afternoon as we studied in the library. There's something weird going on there. I tensed. There's nothing going on. Lucas raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Aha. Right. He tapped his pen against his notebook. So he just glares at me for no reason. I paused. He glares at you. Lucas smirked. Oh, definitely. It's subtle, but trust me, it's there. He leaned back. Are you too? I stiffened. No, Lucas laughed. Relax, I wasn't judging. Just. I don't know, man. He acts different around you. I didn't have an answer for that. Because Ryan was different with me. And that night, the way he'd touched my wrist, the way he'd looked at me like he was fighting something, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was late when I finally saw him again. The campus gym was mostly empty, dimly lit with only the low hum of music playing in the background. I just finished a late-night study session and decided to stop by, half hoping, half dreading that he'd be there. And he was. Ryan was in the corner, pounding away at a punching bag. His muscles flexed with every hit, his breathing controlled but heavy. He hadn't noticed me yet. I should have left. But instead, I watched. He was frustrated. I could see it, the way his movements were sharper than usual, the way his jaw clenched every time he landed a punch. And then. "I can feel you staring, Monroe." His voice startled me, but I didn't look away. Ryan slowed, resting his hands on the bag before turning toward me. His hair was damp, his shirt clinging to his skin. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto mine. I swallowed. "You've been avoiding me." Ryan exhaled sharply, grabbing his water bottle and taking a long sip before answering. "Didn't realize you cared." I frowned. "You're the one who keeps starting something and then running away from it." His grip tightened around the bottle. "There's nothing to run from." I stepped closer. "Then why do you keep looking at me like that?" Ryan's jaw ticked. "Like what?" "Like you want to push me against a wall or kiss me, but you can't decide which." Ryan inhaled sharply. For a second, neither of us moved. The air between us crackled, thick with tension, with something unspoken but heavy. Then, suddenly, Ryan laughed. It wasn't light. It was sharp, bitter, like he hated himself for finding this funny. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You're impossible," he muttered. I crossed my arms. "So I've heard." Ryan studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Then, voice lower, rougher. "You really want to know what this is, Monroe?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." Ryan exhaled slowly. Then, before I could react, he took another step closer, closing the distance between us entirely. And for the first time, I really wasn't sure what would happen next. Ryan was too close. Close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched like he was holding himself back. Close enough that the heat of his body seeped into mine, making it impossible to ignore the way my pulse jumped. I should have stepped back. But I didn't. I couldn't. Ryan's eyes flickered over my face, searching, hesitating. His breathing was controlled, but I could feel the weight behind it. Like he was fighting a battle I couldn't see. Then, voice low, rough. "You want to know why I keep looking at you?" My throat went dry. I shouldn't want this. Whatever this was, this push and pull, this game we kept playing, it was dangerous. Reckless. But I nodded. Ryan exhaled sharply. "I hate the way you get under my skin." I swallowed hard. "I could say the same about you." His jaw tightened. "Then why don't you ever walk away?" My breath hitched. Because he was right. I'd had so many chances to step back, to put an end to whatever this was between us. But I never did. Even when he frustrated me, even when I told myself I shouldn't care, I kept coming back. Kept letting him get this close. The silence between us stretched. The air was thick, heavy with tension, with something I wasn't ready to name. Then, suddenly, Ryan's fingers brushed against my wrist. Barely a touch. A whisper of contact. But it sent a sharp jolt through my entire body. I sucked in a breath. "Ryan." And just like that, he stepped back. The warmth disappeared. The tension shattered. Ryan's face was unreadable again, his guard snapping back into place like nothing had happened. "This is a mistake," he muttered, shaking his head. "I can't." His voice cracked, just for a second. But I heard it. He turned, grabbing his bag, moving like he needed to get away now. I should have let him go. But my chest ached in a way I didn't understand. And before I could stop myself, before I could think, I reached out, fingers curling around his wrist. Ryan froze. His muscles tensed under my touch. His breath hitched. And for the first time, I wasn't the only one who wasn't letting go. Ryan didn't move. He didn't pull away, didn't shove me off like he usually would. He just stood there, his wrist trapped in my grip, his body rigid. I could feel the tension rolling off him, thick, suffocating, like he was at war with himself. I swallowed hard. Tell me you don't feel this. Ryan exhaled sharply, eyes flickering toward mine. His expression was unreadable, but his pulse, fast, unsteady, betrayed him. Alex. It was barely a whisper. A warning. A plea. I loosened my grip, but I didn't step back. Why do you keep running? Ryan clenched his jaw. Because I have to. Why? Silence. Ryan's fingers curled slightly, like he wanted to grab my hand but wouldn't let himself. His breathing was shallow now, his entire body coiled tight, like he was ready to break apart at any second. This isn't, he cut himself off, dragging a hand through his hair. I don't know how to. Another pause. Another deep, shuddering breath. Then, quieter. I don't know what to do with this. My heart stopped. Because for the first time, he was admitting something. Even if he couldn't put it into words. Even if he still wouldn't look at me properly, I took a step closer, closing the space between us again. You don't have to know. Ryan's breath hitched. For a moment, I thought he might let me in. That he might stop fighting it, whatever this was between us. But then, just like that, his expression shut down. He yanked his wrist free, stepping back like I'd burned him. Forget it, he muttered. Just, forget it. And before I could stop him, before I could even process what had just happened, he was gone. I didn't see him for days. Not in class. Not on campus. I told myself I didn't care. That I wasn't waiting for him, but every time I passed by the gym, every time I walked into class, every time I saw someone remotely tall and broad-shouldered, my stomach dropped. I hated how much space he was taking up in my head. Hated that I could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch, the weight of his stare. Hated that I missed him, even though I knew he was just going to push me away again. But then, 3 nights later, there was a knock on my door. Late. Too late for anyone else. My pulse spiked. And when I opened it, Ryan was standing there. Disheveled. Breathless. And for the first time, he looked like he didn't want to run anymore. Ryan didn't speak. He just stood there, chest rising and falling like he'd run all the way here, his hair a mess like he'd dragged his hands through it one too many times. His hoodie was wrinkled, his fists clenched at his sides. And his eyes, they looked like a storm barely holding itself together. I swallowed hard. Ryan? His jaw tightened. His gaze flickered past me, like he was second-guessing being here. Like he was about to bolt. So before he could slip away again, I stepped aside. Come in. Ryan hesitated, just for a second. Then, with a sharp exhale, he stepped past me, into my dorm. I closed the door behind him, my heart hammering. He didn't sit. Didn't make himself comfortable. Instead, he stood in the middle of my room, hands gripping the hem of his hoodie like he was holding himself together. I crossed my arms, watching him. Are you going to tell me why you're here? Ryan exhaled through his nose. I don't know. I arched an eyebrow. You don't know? He shook his head, frustrated. He ran a hand through his hair. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. My stomach tightened. What about it? I asked carefully. Ryan let out a short, bitter laugh. What about it? He finally looked at me, and his expression, God, it was wrecked. You grabbed me, Alex. You held on. And I didn't. He stopped, like the words were too much. Like they scared him. I took a slow step forward. You didn't what? Ryan inhaled sharply. I didn't hate it. Something in my chest stopped. Everything in me went still. He was admitting it. Finally, he was saying something real. The tension between us thickened, stretched so tight it felt like something might snap. I swallowed. Then why do you keep running from me? Ryan dragged a hand down his face. Because I don't know how to stop. And that broke something in me. Because it wasn't just frustration in his voice. It was fear. A quiet, desperate kind of fear. Like he was terrified of what this meant. Of what we meant. I took another step closer. Then another. Ryan let me. He didn't back away. Didn't tense up. Just watched me, breathing uneven. And when I was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, I reached out, slow, deliberate, and brushed my fingers against his. Ryan inhaled sharply. I didn't move away. Neither did he. I looked up at him. You don't have to run. Ryan's throat bobbed. And for the first time, he didn't argue. Ryan didn't move. Didn't pull away. Didn't shove me off like he always did when things got too real. Instead, his fingers, rough, calloused from years of sports, twitched beneath mine, like he wanted to hold on but didn't know if he should. His breathing was shallow, uneven. His gaze locked onto mine, something raw flickering behind his stormy eyes. And then. You scare me, Alex. My breath caught. I blinked up at him, my heart slamming against my ribs. What? Ryan swallowed, his jaw tensing. You scare me. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Ryan. I don't do this. His voice was quiet, strained. I don't get close to people. I don't let them see me like. He stopped, exhaling sharply. Like this. I felt my throat close up. Because I knew, God, I knew exactly what he meant. Ryan Calloway, the golden boy, the untouchable star athlete, wasn't supposed to hesitate. Wasn't supposed to doubt himself. Wasn't supposed to be standing in my dorm room at midnight, looking at me like I was the only thing holding him together. I exhaled slowly. Then why are you here? Ryan let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. Hell if I know. But he still wasn't moving away. And neither was I. The silence stretched between us, heavy, crackling. Then, slowly, Ryan reached up, just barely, and his fingers brushed against my wrist. Not grabbing. Not pulling. Just touching. Testing. My breath hitched, but I didn't move away. And that was all it took. Ryan inhaled sharply, like he'd finally lost the fight against himself, before suddenly, finally, gripping my wrist fully. Firm. Certain. I sucked in a breath, the warmth of his skin searing into mine. Ryan. His grip tightened, his thumb brushing against my pulse. Don't make me regret this. My chest ached. And I wasn't sure if he meant coming here tonight. Or letting me in at all. Ryan's grip on my wrist was tight, his thumb pressing just hard enough to make me feel it. Not painful. Not forceful. Just, real. Like he needed something to hold on to. Like he needed me. My heart pounded. I could have pulled away. Could have let him go like he always expected me to. But I didn't. Instead, I lifted my other hand, fingers hovering just over his chest. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. Ryan stilled. His breath hitched, his jaw clenching, but he didn't stop me. Didn't push me away. Didn't run. So I let my fingers graze against his hoodie, barely touching, just testing the boundary of whatever this was between us. Ryan shuddered. I looked up at him, searching. Tell me what you want. His eyes snapped to mine, stormy, conflicted. Then, barely above a whisper. I don't know how. I swallowed hard, because that hesitation, that crack in his voice, was the closest thing to the truth he had ever given me. Ryan Calloway, the guy who had spent years pretending he didn't care, was standing in my room, holding on to me like he wasn't sure what would happen if he let go. I took a breath. Then let me show you. Ryan's fingers twitched around my wrist. His gaze flickered to my mouth, just for a second. A brief, fleeting second. But I saw it. Felt the heat coil low in my stomach. Felt the way the air between us shifted. He was thinking about it. About what would happen if he crossed the line, if he let himself want this. I tilted my chin up, closing the space just a little. Ryan. But before I could finish, before I could even breathe, Ryan dropped my wrist and took a full step back, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. I blinked, the warmth of his touch disappearing in an instant. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His chest was rising and falling too fast, like he was barely holding himself together. Then, voice low, rough. I can't. The word stung. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. Ryan. I can't, he repeated, sharper this time, like he was convincing himself more than me. And before I could stop him, before I could even process what had just happened, Ryan turned on his heel and walked out the door, leaving me standing there. Alone. Again. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself I didn't care. That I hadn't expected anything else. That Ryan running, again, was just another predictable part of whatever this messed up thing between us was. But still, I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of his touch on my wrist. Feeling the weight of everything he didn't say. By morning, I was exhausted. And pissed. Because I was tired of the push and pull. Tired of letting him walk away just to come back again when he felt like it. But mostly, I was tired of pretending this wasn't affecting me. So when I saw him in the hallway before class, standing by his locker like nothing had happened, something in me snapped. I walked straight up to him, ignoring the small group of his teammates nearby. He saw me before I said anything. His whole body tensed, his grip on his textbook tightening. Alex, he started, voice low, almost cautious. But I wasn't in the mood for caution. What the hell are we doing, Ryan? His jaw clenched. His teammates glanced at us, but I didn't care. I wasn't lowering my voice. I stepped closer. You show up at my door in the middle of the night. You touch me like you don't want to let go. You look at me like, I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. And then you run. Ryan's expression darkened. I didn't. Yes, you did. My voice was steadier than I felt. You always do. His hands curled into fists. His breathing had picked up, his whole body stiff like he was ready to fight. And maybe he was. Because that's what Ryan did when things got too real. He fought. But not this time. I exhaled, my voice softer. You can't keep doing this. His throat bobbed. For a second, I thought he was going to say something. Something real, something that explained why he kept pulling me close just to push me away. But instead, he scoffed. Loud enough for his teammates to hear. Loud enough for them to laugh. You seriously think I give a shit about whatever you're talking about? His voice was sharp, mocking. You're delusional. My stomach dropped. Because that was worse than him walking away. That was him pretending. Acting like I was just some joke. Like we were just some joke. I forced myself to smile, even though my hands were shaking. Right. Of course. I must have imagined it. His smirk faltered, just for a second, but I didn't wait for him to recover. Didn't wait for him to say something that might make this hurt even worse. I turned and walked away. And this time, I wasn't the one waiting for him to come back. I wasn't going to wait for Ryan anymore. If he wanted to pretend like nothing had happened between us, then fine, I could pretend too. So when I walked into the next lecture and spotted Damien, sitting a few rows ahead, I made a decision before I could second-guess it. Damien, tall, dark-haired, with that easy charm that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He wasn't Ryan, but maybe that was the point. He noticed me approaching and smirked. Alex Monroe. To what do I owe this honor? I slid into the seat beside him, giving him a small smile. Just thought I'd sit next to someone who actually acknowledges my existence. Damien raised an eyebrow, amused. Ouch. Someone's in a mood. I shrugged, pulling out my notebook. Maybe. He studied me for a moment before leaning in slightly, his voice lower. Well, I don't mind keeping you company. I've been waiting for my chance, anyway. I arched an eyebrow. Oh. And here I thought you just enjoyed flirting with everyone. Damien grinned. Maybe. But I like you more than most. I felt the presence before I even looked up. Ryan, standing at the entrance, his gaze locked on me like he'd just walked into something he wasn't prepared to see. And the moment he saw Damien leaning in, saw the way I didn't pull away. His entire expression darkened. I pretended not to notice. Ryan clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He looked pissed. Good. Because now he knew what it felt like. For once, he was the one watching me slip through his fingers. Ryan didn't sit down. Didn't move. He just stood at the entrance, staring at me like I'd done something unforgivable. Like I'd betrayed him, which was ironic, because he was the one who kept pushing me away. Damien, completely unaware of the tension crackling in the air, smirked. So, Alex, how come we've never hung out before? I feel like we'd get along pretty well. I forced a light laugh, fully aware that Ryan was still watching. Guess I've been keeping bad company. Damien chuckled, but Ryan looked like he was about to murder someone. His hands were still clenched at his sides, his jaw locked so tight I was surprised he hadn't shattered a tooth, and when he finally moved, it wasn't to take his usual seat across the room. It was straight toward us. My breath caught, but I kept my expression neutral. Ryan stopped right behind me, his presence looming, his voice low. You're in my seat. Damien glanced up, unbothered. Didn't know you had a reserved sign on it. Ryan ignored him, his eyes boring into me. Move. I blinked, feigning confusion. Why? You've never cared where I sit before. His nostrils flared. Alex. His voice was tight. Strained. I tilted my head. I'm fine here, thanks. Damien laughed, clearly enjoying the show. Relax, Calloway. You can sit on my other side. Ryan didn't even acknowledge him. His gaze stayed locked on me, the storm behind his eyes threatening to crack open. And for the first time, I could see it, real jealousy. Not the kind he could shrug off or laugh away. The ugly, possessive kind. He hated this. Hated seeing me with someone else. And I thrived on it. Suit yourself, I murmured, turning back to my notebook. Ryan didn't move for a long second. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply, muttered something under his breath, and stormed off. But I didn't miss the way his shoulders were stiff. The way his fingers twitched like he was barely holding himself together. Or the way he glanced back, just once, before taking his seat. I'd won this round, but I had a feeling Ryan Calloway wasn't going to let it go. Ryan lasted exactly 24 hours before he snapped. I was at the campus cafe, minding my own business, when I heard someone slam a chair across from me. I didn't even have to look up. I sighed, stirring my coffee. And here I thought you didn't care where I Saturday. Ryan's hands were flat on the table, fingers tense against the surface. He leaned in slightly, voice low. What the hell are you doing? I blinked at him innocently. Drinking coffee. Cut the crap, Alex. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. Since when do you hang out with Damien? Ah. So that's what this was about. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch. Since when do you care? Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I don't. He stopped himself, his knee bouncing under the table. I tilted my head. Just what? His throat bobbed. He's not good for you. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's rich, coming from you. Ryan's nostrils flared. I mean it, Alex. So do I. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. You don't get to be jealous. You don't get to act like this after pushing me away over and over again. His fingers twitched, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. I'm not jealous. I let out a humorless chuckle. Right. That's why you're acting like you're about to punch a wall. Ryan's breathing was shallow, like he was holding himself back. Like he didn't know whether to yell or kiss me just to shut me up. But I was done waiting for him to figure it out. I stood up, grabbing my coffee. Let me know when you actually do know what you want. Then I walked away, and for the first time, he didn't stop me. I told myself I wouldn't think about it. Wouldn't think about him. About the way his jaw had clenched, his fingers twitching like he was 1 second away from grabbing my wrist, again. But I did. I thought about all of it as I walked back to my dorm, as I tried to focus on anything but the tight feeling in my chest. I was so lost in my own head that I almost didn't notice the figure waiting by my door. Almost. Ryan. Leaning against the wall, hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, his posture tense. Like he hadn't quite figured out why he was here. I stopped a few steps away, crossing my arms. You lost? His gaze flicked up, stormy and unreadable. You walked away. I huffed a laugh. Yeah, well. You kind of set the standard on that. Ryan exhaled, looking away. I know. I frowned. Then what do you want? He hesitated. Just for a second. Then, I don't want to do this anymore. My stomach tightened. Do what? Ryan's fingers twitched in his pockets. He looked at me, his eyes sharp, determined, frustrated. This. The back and forth. The fighting. The pretending. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Ryan took a step closer. I hate when you're with him. His voice was lower now, almost quiet. I hate seeing you smile at someone else the way you. He cut himself off, exhaling sharply. I stayed silent. Because for once, he was the one chasing me. Ryan clenched his jaw. I don't know what to do with this, Alex. I don't know how to. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. I just know I can't stand the thought of losing you. My throat felt tight. Then stopped pushing me away. His gaze locked onto mine, something raw flashing in his eyes. Tell me how. And that was when I knew. Ryan Calloway wasn't just fighting me. He was fighting himself. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to lose. Ryan looked like he wanted to run. His fingers twitched, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths, his entire body tight like a wire pulled too thin. But he didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't shove me away like he always did when things got too real. And that was the only reason I didn't let him off the hook. I swallowed. Then stopped pushing me away. Ryan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. I exhaled, my voice softer now. You either want me in your life or you don't. His throat bobbed, but he didn't answer. I waited. But he just stood there, his gaze burning into mine like he was daring me to back down. I didn't. Instead, I took a step closer. If you're so afraid of losing me, then do something about it. Ryan's breathing hitched. And in that moment, I knew. Knew he was 1 second away from breaking. From giving in. From Alex. A new voice. Not his. I blinked, turning just in time to see Damien walking up the hall. Right. I had plans with him. And Ryan knew that. I saw the way his entire posture stiffened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. His mask snapped back into place so fast it made my chest ache. Hey. Damien shot me a grin, then glanced at Ryan. Am I interrupting something? Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. Not at all. Liar. I didn't move. Didn't step toward Damien. Didn't step away from Ryan. But I could feel the tension shift, the way Ryan was shutting down again, retreating, hiding behind that damn wall of his. My stomach twisted. Ryan turned, hands shoving into his pockets as he started walking away. He didn't look back. And this time, I was the one who let him go. I didn't enjoy my time with Damien. Not because he wasn't good company, he was charming, easygoing, and he actually listened when I spoke. But because my mind was elsewhere. Because no matter how hard I tried to focus on our conversation, I kept thinking about him. Ryan. The way his face had changed the second he saw Damien. The way his walls had snapped back into place like a reflex, like self-defense. And the worst part? I let him walk away. Damien noticed. Halfway through our coffee, he leaned back, watching me with a knowing smirk. You're really bad at pretending, you know that. I blinked. What? He nodded toward my untouched drink. You've been stirring that for 10 minutes. And you haven't heard a word I said. I exhaled, setting the cup down. Sorry. My head's just somewhere else. Damien hummed, studying me for a beat before shrugging. I don't mind. I frowned. You don't? Nope. He sipped his coffee, smirking. Because I already know how this ends. I narrowed my eyes. And how's that? Damien chuckled. With you choosing him. I froze. Damien just raised an eyebrow. Tell me I'm wrong. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because the truth. I couldn't. I didn't see Ryan for 2 days. 2 very long days. Not on campus. Not at the gym. Not at our usual haunts where we always seemed to accidentally run into each other. It was like he was avoiding me. Which meant I had to be the one to find him. So I did. I showed up at his dorm, heart hammering in my chest as I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. I sighed, raking a hand through my hair before muttering, Ryan, I swear to God. The door swung open. And there he was. Disheveled. Tired. Shirtless. And staring at me like I was the last person he wanted to see. My stomach twisted. You're avoiding me. Ryan exhaled sharply. Maybe that's a sign. Something inside me snapped. I pushed past him, stepping inside before he could slam the door in my face. No. You don't get to do this again. Ryan turned, jaw tight. Do what? Run. I met his gaze head-on. You always run, Ryan. The second things get too real, you shut down, push me away, and act like none of this means anything. His fingers curled into fists. Maybe it doesn't. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Say that again. He didn't. Couldn't. Because we both knew it was a lie. The silence stretched. Thick. Suffocating. Then, Ryan let out a sharp breath, running a hand down his face. Alex, I don't know how to do this. My chest ached. Then let me show you. Ryan swallowed hard. And for the first time. He didn't run. Ryan didn't run. He just stood there, chest rising and falling like he'd just lost a fight he never wanted to admit he was in. I didn't give him time to think. Didn't give him time to build his walls back up. Because I was done waiting. I grabbed his shirt, yanking him down as my lips crashed into his. Ryan froze. For a second, just one, I thought he might push me away. But then. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer. The kiss was desperate, heated, years of tension snapping all at once. His lips moved against mine like he was starving for it, like he needed this just as much as I did. I bit his bottom lip, just enough to make him groan. He growled into the kiss, hands tightening, pulling me flush against him. It was messy. Uncontrolled. And it was everything. I kissed him harder, pouring every ounce of frustration, longing, and want into him. And for once. Ryan let me. He kissed me back like he had nothing left to hide. Like he finally knew the truth. That there was no more fighting this. No more running. No more denying us. We broke apart, breathless. Ryan's forehead rested against mine, his grip still tight on my waist like he was afraid to let go. I could feel his heartbeat, fast and unsteady, matching my own. His eyes flickered open, dark and dazed. Alex. My fingers curled into his shirt. Say it. His throat bobbed. Say what? I licked my lips, still tasting him. That you want this. Ryan inhaled sharply, his hands flexing against my sides. His jaw tightened like he was trying to fight it, trying to resist. But he couldn't. Not anymore. His voice was hoarse when he finally said it. I do. I exhaled. Then stop acting like you don't. Ryan's eyes searched mine, something raw and vulnerable flashing behind them. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. I swallowed. You either want me or you don't. A beat of silence. Then. Ryan cursed under his breath before grabbing my face and kissing me again. This one was different. Not just desperate, possessive. Like he wanted to erase every doubt, every hesitation, every second wasted pretending we weren't inevitable. I melted into it, hands fisting his shirt, pulling him closer, closer. Until he suddenly pulled away, his breath shaky. I frowned. What? Ryan ran a hand through his hair, eyes flickering with conflict. I don't know how to do this, Alex. My chest ached. Then let's figure it out. Together. Ryan exhaled, his fingers twitching at his sides like he wanted to reach for me again but was scared to. I didn't let him hesitate. I took his hand, squeezing it tight. No more running, Ryan. His jaw clenched. Then, after a long pause, he squeezed back. Ryan didn't let go. His hand was warm in mine, his grip firm, like he was holding on just tight enough to stop himself from slipping back into old habits. I let myself breathe. Just for a second. Because this, him, standing here, not running, not shoving me away, was something I never thought I'd get. But before I could say anything, before I could even process what this meant, the knock on his door shattered the moment. Ryan's entire body tensed. I frowned, reluctantly stepping back as he ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Who the hell? Another knock. This time more impatient. Ryan cursed under his breath before yanking the door open. And standing on the other side was Damien. My stomach dropped. Damien's gaze flickered between us, his expression unreadable. Then his lips curled into something almost amused. Wow, he mused, crossing his arms. Guess I had good timing. Ryan's jaw clenched. What do you want? Damien smirked, but there was something sharp behind it. Relax, Calloway. I'm not here to fight you for him. Ryan didn't move. Didn't respond. But I felt the way his grip tightened on the doorknob. I stepped forward. Damien, what are you doing here? His gaze flickered to mine. Came to check on you. You left in a hurry. Ryan's muscles tensed. I swallowed. I'm fine. Damien studied me for a second before his smirk softened into something real. Good. Then he turned to Ryan, his expression shifting into something more unreadable. But you? He chuckled. You look like you've seen a ghost. Ryan glared at him. Leave. Damien raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. No need to get all territorial. His eyes gleamed as he glanced at me. You sure he's the one who was running all this time? Ryan didn't even hesitate. Shut the hell up. Damien just laughed. Then, with one last lingering glance at me, he turned and walked away. The second the door clicked shut, Ryan let out a sharp breath, raking a hand down his face. I hesitated. Ryan. His jaw flexed. You're really close with him, huh? I blinked. What? Ryan's gaze met mine, and something about the way he was looking at me made my stomach twist. He wasn't just angry. He was jealous. Again. Ryan's jaw was tight, his arms crossed, and his entire body radiated tension. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Ryan, don't start. His gaze darkened. I'm not starting anything. I'm just asking. I let out a humorless laugh. No, you're assuming. Ryan stepped closer, eyes sharp. Am I? I clenched my teeth. Damien is my friend, Ryan. He scoffed. Yeah. Didn't look like that to me. Something inside me snapped. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. You don't get to do this. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Do what? Act like you have a claim on me. My voice was quiet, but firm. Like you can push me away whenever it's convenient for you, but the second someone else so much as looks at me, you act like I owe you something. Ryan's throat bobbed. That's not what this is. Then what is it? I asked, heart pounding. Because you sure as hell aren't acting like this is nothing. He stayed silent. I exhaled, shaking my head. See? You can't even say it. Ryan's hands twitched at his sides. Alex. I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. If you want me, say it. Silence. The kind that felt heavy, suffocating. I turned to leave. But before I could even take a step, Ryan grabbed my wrist. I barely had time to react before he pulled me back, his grip firm, his breathing uneven. I do want you, he admitted, voice raw. I always have. My heart stopped. But then he shook his head, jaw tight. But I don't know how to do this. I stared at him, my chest aching. Then stop fighting it. Ryan exhaled sharply, his grip on my wrist tightening for just a second before he let go. And this time, I was the one who walked away. I didn't look back. Not when I stepped out of his dorm. Not when I made it down the hall. Not even when my heart was screaming at me to turn around. But I barely made it to the stairs before I heard it. Ryan's voice. Alex, wait. I froze. Then, footsteps. Fast. Desperate. And before I could react, Ryan was in front of me, chest rising and falling, eyes wild with something I hadn't seen before. Panic. Fear. Want. I don't want you to walk away, he admitted, voice hoarse. Not from me. My throat tightened. Then don't give me a reason to. Ryan swallowed hard. I'm messed up, Alex. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know how to do this without screwing it up. I stepped closer, my voice soft. You don't have to be perfect, Ryan. His eyes searched mine, something raw and vulnerable flickering behind them. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. You just have to try. Ryan's fingers curled around mine, hesitant at first, then firm. Then, finally, he pulled me in. And kissed me. Not like before, not desperate, not rushed. But like he was choosing this. Choosing me. His hands framed my face, his lips moving against mine with a slow, deliberate intensity, like he was making up for every second he spent running. And this time, I knew he wouldn't let go. Not again. Not ever. Some things didn't change. Ryan was still stubborn as hell. Still short-tempered. Still got way too competitive over the dumbest things. But some things did change. Like the way he actually talked to me now instead of pushing me away. Like the way he held my hand under the table when no one was looking. Like the way he kissed me, soft, slow, and real. And the way he loved me, even if he wasn't always the best at saying it. But he didn't need to. Because I knew. And this time, Ryan Calloway wasn't running from it. Or from me. And that was all that mattered.